Welcome to the second session of the Fundamental series of Circular Economy. The webinars are organized as a collaboration with Nordic Innovation, Citra and Accenture, and are based on the Circular Economy Playbook, a digital toolkit for companies to go circular, and you can find the link in the chat. I'm Katrina Erskine and is part of Accenture's team in Oslo. It's good to be with you again, and as last time, I will be moderating this session. The session will be recorded and can be found on Nordic Innovation's website in a couple of days. The Fundamental Session 1 is already online. And here you can see the team working on the project, both from Nordic Innovation and Accenture. And today's speakers are Anna Tøndevold, Accenture's Nordic Sustainability Lead, and Kathy McAndrew, Accenture's Circular Innovation Lead. On the next slide, we'll see today's objective. Last session, we covered the circular business models and how they can turn inefficiencies into value. And today, we're looking forward to an exciting session with the focus on going from theory to practice, discussing what capabilities and technologies can enable the circular economy and some of the challenges and opportunities you might meet when implementing circular business models. And as for the agenda, I will start with a 2-minute recap of the circular business models, and then Anna Tøndevold, our sustainability lead, will take us through what are the enabling capabilities and technologies. And then Kathy McAndrew will discuss the transformation journey, typical barriers, and how to overcome them. Before we end with a Q&A session, and therefore please write your questions in the chat along the way so that we can take them up in the end. So when doing a short recap, we know today that our linear value chain generates inefficiencies, and they are generated in different ways. First is when we use unsustainable materials that cannot be recycled at end of life. And another is when we're not fully utilizing our products, or when we're scrapping our products too early. Another inefficiency is when we do not recover materials at end of life. And also a general inefficiency is a failure to identify synergies with customers throughout the value chain. Circular economy aims to address these inefficiencies through the 5 circular business models that you see on the next slide. So the first business model, circular inputs, address the early stage of the products, emphasizing clean energy sources and sustainable materials and design. Sharing platform and product as a service are 2 business models that focus mostly on the use phase of the product. Sharing platforms allow users to share access to increase the usage rates, and product use extension models aim to prolong the life of a product through repair, remanufacturing, or reuse. Product as a service shifts the ownership models from selling products to leasing products, incentivizing a longer life of the product. And finally, resource recovery models looks at capturing the products at end of life and looping the material back into the life cycle. And with this slide and with this recap, now I want to give the word over to Anna Tøndevold, who will cover the capabilities and technologies that you might need when you go circular. So over to you, Anna.
Good. Thank you so much, Catherine, for that handover and for the introduction. So as you said, let's now spend some time to explore what capabilities are required when companies are transforming from a linear to a circular business model. And so what we will explore during this chapter is not just new capabilities that is required, but it's also new mindsets and incentives that will be required. So looking at these capabilities comprehensively across the full value chain, mainly there are 3 distinctive capability categories for a circular economy that is required. We see that there's a stronger emphasis on customer value delivery, on resource handling, and also on organization and collaboration. So let me spend some time in elaborating on these 3. So if we start with customer value delivery, if we think traditionally in the linear economy or the consumption economy, product designers typically face 2 challenges. First, how can they satisfy customer appetite for new product features and meet the changing needs of customers? for example, having the latest technology features or changing to products with superior performance, while also keeping upfront costs low. And this has caused companies in the traditional and linear economy really to focus innovation and product development approaches around winning in markets with new releases. And this is where we got things wrong if you think about the circular economy principles, where we need to start thinking about how we can use products for longer time and keeping them in a closed loop system. So here we need to think how we can drive profits without increasing consumption. So shifting from attracting customers and making margins on new product sales, we need to think about how we can deliver value to customers continuously across the life cycle. So instead of focusing on one-off sales, companies now must think about how they can engage with customers on an ongoing basis by providing services and helping users maximize the product utility across the life cycle. So here, customer value delivery is shifting to focusing much more on enhancing trust with the customer and encouraging more responsible product return and disposal, and provide after sales services. So really shifting from just that one-off sale opportunity to building that customer value proposition across the full lifetime. Secondly, resource handling. It's another key capability that you need for a circular economy, and it also goes across the full value chain from production to use to end of life. And here we need to shift from handling only direct materials that goes into a product, but also encompasses indirect material use, address underutilized capacities and the waste that it's being generated. And typically when companies start with their first steps on the circular economy, they typically focus on their own operations, for example, how they can cut energy consumption or reduce waste associated with their business operations. But eventually companies really need to consider how they can reuse waste within the organization, how they can apply remanufacturing and repair, recycling, and eventually also take back the product at the end of life. So resource management will require a new set of capabilities to address a more broader scope, you can say, of resource management. And then thirdly, around organization and collaboration. And although it's last, is definitely not least important. My experience having worked with companies, this is really one of the key success factors or barriers to help companies really transform and scale circular business models. And helping companies really integrate circularity across the organization. For that, you need circular economy principles really to be integrated at the highest level of the organization, at the leadership level. Because circular economy business models really redefines how companies realize value, and that requires new steering, new targets, new incentives, really to help drive change across the organization. So we need to embed circular principles all the way from how we design, how we source, how we produce, and how we sell services, really building on the capabilities as mentioned in the first two buckets here. And integration is really key, because we can see that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So without having circular economy principles embedded in design, then that's gonna halter the organization for keeping a closed loop across the entire value chain. So it's really important that we don't see this as a standalone, but truly integrated, and leadership is key for this. But not just leadership, it's also requires new external collaborations, both with public and other private sector actors. And here we really need to think beyond traditional core business models and build new ecosystems of partner that can help operationalize and monetize the entire product lifecycle. And this is also a new capability, you can say, for the circular economy. So that's overall. And if we go to the next slide, these categories, they translate into 7 distinctive business capabilities. So taking it one step below this high level categorization. So if we start with customer value delivery, those are the light blue capabilities highlighted here. So here it really starts within design. How can we design for outcomes? This requires a capability where you need to think about really customer needs and put that at the center of the product design, really also encouraging companies to put the customer and other partners at the co-creation of new solutions. I think the example of how can you sell a hole in the wall without selling a drill is really a good example here. So that's the essence of focusing on customer value. They don't necessarily need a product. And then designing for circularity. So how can we embed this into the product design and ensure that it enables longer life cycles and material use, and making sure that the design organization have clear circular design principles and know what trade-offs to make that can really enhance the product across the value chain. And then the sales organization, I think this is truly fundamental, how we sell products. As said, shifting from just selling one-off product to selling customer experience and long-term relationships. So the sales organization here is really about changing incentives and changing KPIs. How can we make sure that the sales organization build long-lasting customer relationships to provide everything from repair and maintenance to product take back, but also add on other services to truly move away from a take, make, waste perspective. Resource handling, that's the dark blue capabilities here. So here it starts with sourcing. So the sourcing organization has typically been measured on how they can reduce cost and source really competitive materials. But from a circular economy perspective, this needs to change, and we need to think about long-term price and risk considerations and volatility, but also enable the sourcing organization to source materials that can be easily regenerated or recycled, and getting access to new circular material sources. So if that's waste trading markets or waste management partnerships, for examples. And then in production here, as mentioned, really help build capabilities that can address waste in its own production, but also ensure that we can have reverse material flows from remanufacturing into product design, but also reverse material flows also from end of life, so we can use recycled materials back in the production loop. And eventually take back capabilities, requiring return logistics systems, not just delivering to customers, but also being able to bring back, and doing that cost effectively is a key capability that could be internally, but also looking into options on how we could collaborate with other actors in this space to drive efficiency. And then really at the center of all this is organization and collaboration. And I think I elaborate quite a bit on culture and steering here, how important it is to really develop and incentivize circular competencies and outcomes across the organization, but also ecosystem collaboration here, how to cater for an increasing number of ecosystem partners, how to define shared value propositions and define the different roles that the actors should play in the ecosystem. Not always easy to be transparent and sharing information. So how can we enable that? And then fundamentally, and I think we see a lot of development in this space at the moment, is really around technology and data and intelligence. So how can we enable the organization to better steer and measure on their performance on circular and other environmental aspect that needs to be taken into consideration? So how can we help and enable across the organization how to leverage real-time data and make decisions based on that. So I think this summarizes the key capability. Obviously, it's a simplified version, but some that are really fundamental and goes across the full value chain. What we try to do is a first mapping on how these capabilities map to the different circular business models, because some are more relevant for some of the business models than others. So I think this is also a recommendation for those of you who now are looking to approach or have already started approaching. Really consider what capabilities are material for the business model that you are driving, and start with prioritizing what capabilities to really build and accelerate. So that's from a capability perspective, and now let's proceed with also looking at technology. So technology is really a key enabler of the circular economy. If we think about circular economy concepts of being efficient with resource use, these are no new concepts really. They've been around for centuries, but the really change in why circular economy is becoming more and more relevant is very much due to technology and how technology is enabling us to better design business models, but also doing that in a more cost-effective way. So if we think about some of the technologies that we've seen from the industrialization and that we're seeing today, just to mention a few, we've seen how availability of data, automation in production, and IoT and connected systems have really transformed and enabled us to be smarter and more resource efficient. And now, most recently, we're seeing new platforms and the metaverse and an increasing level of intelligence and digitalization that is really fundamentally changing business ability to explore circular business models. And the technology development is very exponential and happens at a faster and rapid pace than we've ever seen before. And I think here for this chapter is really key to understand how can we best leverage these technologies to help accelerate and drive the circular economy. So understanding what technologies can really enable the business model of your choice that you're looking to pursue. So if we go to the next slide, to simplify how you should think about technology, we've categorized it in two different aspects. The first is really how we can use technology in order to help us accelerate and drive efficiency in productions and in the solution. But I would also add here perhaps how we can drive better business performance as well through data and insights. So how can we think about using automation or even data-driven insight to reduce inefficiencies and waste? I think we have a good example, for example, Schneider Electric, who through data and intelligence enable their customers to reduce their energy consumption by 30%. So by providing these insights and by providing these data, you can really transform and enable your own business or your customers to drive better performance. And then secondly, companies can use technology as they launch new services and offerings. Having tech and data enable them to better connect with customers and their suppliers in a completely new way. So here, I mean, we can think about the revolution. We've seen actors such as Airbnb leveraging the data and shared platforms to help private people share their homes with a few simple clicks, or Tesla, who can remotely offer upgrades to their customer even after they purchase the car. So if you put that in the context of the circular economy, this enables then sharing economy, and then also enables upgrade and repair and maintenance, and then really thinking about how we can extend that relationship with the customer after end of use or after purchase. So just some examples and to put this in perspective. So then when we look at the different technologies that companies can consider, there's obviously a long list of different technologies to be considered. And as said, this list keeps evolving and the pace of development is fast. But so again, here to help you navigate the landscape, we've categorized it into three categories: digital, physical, and biological technologies. So with digital technologies, we really think about those based on computer or electronics and communication science. So for example, Internet of Things or artificial intelligence. And these types of technology, they use volume of information, that is data, that is coming from the physical asset to, for example, use sensors on physical assets to capture temperature information and then transmitting this to the electronic system. So really, how can we use data and intelligence to steer and develop insights. Physical technologies, here it's those that interact with our physical environment. So for example, this could be a physical robot that automates the production process, or new materials or nanotechnology. And then ultimately, then we have biological. So technologies that are based on biological aspects, everything from using bio-based materials in the product, to generic engineering, to manipulate throughout the biotechnology, for example, gene modified soybean or cotton or other materials. So to think about technologies beyond data and intelligence, where perhaps we consider, at least myself, consider most technologies to expand also into this physical and biological, where we see a lot of relevance, innovation, technologies maturing. So important to understand what technologies are available, but similarly to the capability, to also understand how these technologies are relevant for the different circular business models, and start considering how you should apply them to really enable the performance. So for circular inputs, logically bioenergy to substitute petrol-based materials, for example, or using Internet of Things just to enable better insights on the material throughout the value chain, also being able to track all the way to the end of life, to understand what materials actually went into this product, and how can I better recycle with that information. So I think this was a quick introduction, and there's obviously more to deep dive in these technologies and consider how they can be applied for your specific model. But as always, I refer to our playbook for more information. And with that said, I would like to hand over to Kathy for helping us take us through the next chapter of this presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna, and thanks, Katrine, and hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that journey from kind of the very beginning of a circular exploration to actually how to really innovate for circular business models for change, transform your business, and really begin to scale some of those models. And we typically see this journey as being categorized in 3 phases. And you'll see that when in development for a new business model, it very much overlaps with your previous business model. And I think that's a really important illustration to really highlight, because oftentimes in this transition or this transformation, both models will exist in parallel, and it's really a journey from moving from one to the other, and with many challenges and barriers to overcome, but also a huge amount of opportunity. So when we talk about this, first of all, we really talk about the first phase being exploring and shaping. So really starting a little bit from scratch and beginning to think about, what are those circular goals or the vision that you have for your organization, and what concepts at a very high level can help you to get there. So it's a very much an ideation phase, where you really think about the business models that across the kind of the full sphere of circular that Anna talked to in the past section, and how can we start to ideate under each of those models conceptually to think about what might fit your business best, and how can you look across both peers in your industry, but also actually a lot of the time cross industry. How can you look at what's been done in other industries and apply that to your own business to start to ideate for new models? And then really it's at a very high level in this phase beginning to think about, okay, how can we experiment? We might have a hunch, we might be we might have gathered a lot of information and begin to form early hypotheses. How can we be hypotheses led to start to collect the data and the insights and the evidence base that will show us that actually prototyping this concept or developing a pilot of this business model is a viable initiative to undertake, and how do we go about doing that? Who do we need to get on board as well, as we begin to think about that early stage? When you've actually established what concepts and what business models at a high level you think might get you towards your goal, it's then about thinking, okay, how do we get this out into the market? How do we double down on some of those testing pieces? What partnerships can get us there? How can we think about the capabilities that will unlock this in a meaningful way, accelerating it to market, both in a pilot capacity, but also then when we think about scale? So, thinking about some of those capabilities and where it makes sense to buy or build your own or acquire or partner. So there's really many different ways that you can actually do that. And then, there's this really important kind of iterate and test, I think, message that comes in this attract and win phase, where when you are out in the market and you're doing your testing, being able to kind of iterate and experiment quickly, for your MVPs to be agile and to be able to iterate them, to really think about how we can move to scale quickly. Maybe that's in certain regions, maybe that's with certain target customers, and then there may be other options or ways that those business models have to shift depending on context or depending on sub kind of target group as well within your customer group. But really it's all to get us to phase 3, which is scale fast and keep growing. So really thinking about how those business models can be adopted at scale, how really you can move ultimately from a legacy business model into a circular one, how that transformation can occur both internally and across your ecosystem, and how those multidisciplinary teams, both internally and how they interface from an ecosystem perspective, can work together to drive impact at scale and with speed. So that's kind of the first overview, but then we're going to look a little bit in the next couple of slides on essentially 3 main framed as barriers, but maybe we look as well a little bit about the kind of positive nature of you come up against some of these tensions that are healthy and they really can unlock new opportunity. So when we talk about kind of some of those opportunities or to be ready for some of the barriers you may face when it comes to some of the when it comes to really kind of transitioning on this journey, you might think about them in 3 categories. So the first one being kind of people and culture. And Anna talked a little bit to this already, and I will certainly go into detail now over the coming slides. But really, how are you fostering that circular innovation mindset? And how are you driving accountability and circular learning through your business? The second piece is all about transparency and standardization, and we're seeing a huge push for this, kind of across the market. Everyone needs to be able to talk the same language when it comes to what you're measuring. What is circular intelligence? How can we interface with different companies across an ecosystem, different organizations, if we're all measuring different things? So there's an element of, what is the data that we're looking to actually track? What are the KPIs and metrics that we need to measure? And how is this standardized? So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then really to kind of emphasize again Anna's points around ecosystem collaboration. It might be coming third in these slides, but it is one of the most fundamental and maybe intangible, quite difficult things to actually nail when it comes to a circular transformation. And the role of that, thinking about that early on in the way you plan for this is really critical. But perhaps we'll double click a little bit into people and culture now next. So really maybe just to talk a little bit about this, and it's quite an exciting place to be, I think, despite the challenges and maybe some of the barriers that come up. But I think there's sort of 3 things here that interface across the patch. And it is this piece around people being at the heart of the transformation for circular, and really thinking about how can the hearts and minds of the people that work for you be won on this agenda. And we're seeing such a rise when it comes to employees wanting to work for a purpose-led company, and we're seeing the positive effects of where you give ownership to your organizational employees and to own some parts of this circular agenda or innovation agenda. There is a huge amount of positive feedback loops when it comes to employee retention and actually the development of solutions that will actually enable us to kind of get there when it comes to thinking and ideating for circular business models. But I think one of the big things is actually this mindset change that needs to happen internally and indeed at every level. and really trying to incentivize that mindset shift, to really instill kind of this feeling that it's okay to test and learn, and for things not to be perfect at all. In fact, actually, it's good if they're not, because if you're early hypothesis led, you can iterate and test and build, and it is far more meaningful and indeed much more impactful. And an encouragement really to enable kind of sharing of best principles rather than best practice. So it's that piece of how can we take what's worked well, extract the principle of at the heart or the nub of the concept, and then apply it somewhere else, and kind of fail fast, be brave in that, have resilience, have grit, determination, feel supported, lots of things, and ultimately, be able to unlock some of these scale paths. I think as well, just mentioning this, like oftentimes what can happen is that there's siloed working, and maybe this will resonate with some people on the call, but really trying to think about how those silos break down, how we enable multidisciplinary teams that have a stake in this agenda to come together. Maybe that's through metrics, through shared accountability, and indeed proper investment and sufficient R&D resourcing as well will get us there when it comes to thinking about how we drive people change. Maybe we'll move to the next slide and talk a little bit about circular intelligence. And I did mention, at the very beginning of kind of this section that I think ultimately this is becoming critical to the discussion and discourse more broadly around circular. And I think really just maybe the key takeaway point here is, in order to understand circular performance, in order to make the right decisions across a business that interface with circular, we really need to have the correct data, and we really need to understand what metrics will actually help us to be data-led in the decisions we have to make for our business models and how they scale. And when I say kind of those decisions, I'm talking about the financial decisions for your business, your profitability, your revenue sharing, your kind of gross merchandising value, all of those kind of key metrics, but also, the planetary boundaries. And when you think about some of those resource metrics and thinking about, to Anna's point, waste, water, emissions, etc., and avoidance of emissions, and indeed then kind of some of your people metrics, and thinking about, kind of your customers, but also your staff, and how those three kind of areas interface, and how by kind of creating the correct metrics, we're able to measure and understand the materiality of circular initiatives, and actually benchmark what's getting us closer to a goal that we've identified and what's actually not helping us get there. And that's how we kind of begin to prioritize. And also by standardizing these metrics, beyond one organization and in an industry perhaps, then it's really enables, greater collaboration, greater sharing, of transparency, of approaches, etc., between organizations as well, when it kind of levels the playing field. You can see that there's a ton of drivers and levers that we talk to, but broadly speaking, I think, this feeling of it unlocking kind of related business value, and being able to actually kind of step back and appropriately benchmark the initiatives that you have and where they're going, and the decisions that you're making is a really key driver for circular intelligence more broadly. And then perhaps we'll move on to this piece around kind of achieving, the full circular advantage, or really thinking about how we move to an ecosystem-led approach. And this really requires a step back and a kind of a zoom out from even your own industry-specific value chain, to think anew about how we can really reposition ourselves into this kind of multi-value chain approach, or this kind of cross-industry value network, as we have here on the slide. And there's lots of different considerations that come to bear here. So everything from the way you think about your offering, to the way, you interact, and, the objectives you have as a business, to, how actually your solutions get developed, and how you drive relationships, with some of your kind of key stakeholders, both internally and externally. And really kind of moving towards being outcome focused, being kind of multidisciplinary, multilateral, really driving for open innovation, open collaboration, and bringing many people along and many organizations along with you. And one example of this that I love to cite is Levi Strauss, the jeans and denim company. And I think Levi do this and have done this historically really well, in that they've engaged in kind of non-competitive and transparent sharing of knowledge when it comes to supporting circular thinking. And Levi have shared, trade secrets in their manufacturing process for highly efficient denim finishing processes that save up to 96% water. So this is kind of, they've white labeled this process, and they've encouraged other peers across the retail and fashion industry to adopt this. I think that's a great example of how you're moving the dial beyond your own business to actually change an ecosystem. And maybe then, with a little bit of a double click on ecosystems and bringing to life a little bit how this actually comes to pass, we've kind of got 3 examples here of, and one may be more relevant for your business than others. But when we think about, different ways to take an ecosystem approach when you're designing new circular business models, there actually may be opportunities in places that you've not thought about before. So when we think about kind of bundled offerings as a first port of call, and really this is kind of all about thinking about where you can capture value from an underutilized resource by addressing kind of customer pain points up front. And this is kind of thinking about how you could partner with a company that maybe you wouldn't have thought about initially, or it might be a little bit outside your typical traditional wheelhouse, to be able to actually offer a complementary service. And some of these kind of business models are particularly relevant for things like sharing platforms, for extending the use of a product, and also product as a service. And Hello Tractor, a tractor sharing platform operating in Africa, does this really, really well. So would encourage you to look at that example. I think they're a tech pioneer of the World Economic Forum this year. We've got 2 other ones, and I think one of these is interesting because it's thinking about how you can deliver services together. So how you can partner with companies, how you can bring perhaps a technology to a company, for example, a fast-moving consumer goods company, to really drive the efficiency of their business. So kind of thinking back to what Anna has said about how we leverage technology and some of those platform solutions, and indeed additional biological and physical tech, to really drive some of those new delivery of services. And then finally, really thinking about how you reconfigure who you're engaging with in your value chain. And, a good example perhaps here is thinking about AMP Robotics, who are a AI-driven robotics recycling company who take apart both metals and e-waste and also plastic, and repatriate that through the value chain. So again, really thinking about what are those new models and new tech plays that might enable new opportunities. I'm going to pretty much leave it there, maybe with one final slide and one takeaway message, that actually this journey is hard and this journey is long and really requires everybody to kind of come together to share learnings and to collaborate across the ecosystem. Anna mentioned how people start getting their own house in order first. So really thinking about those circular operations, how can you create a holistic circular strategy internally? That's the starting point. But then you move quite quickly to think about what are those business models, those circular products and services that actually will enable a step change in your industry. And then when you think about full, ecosystem transformation, how are we transforming the value chains in which we operate? How are we collaborating with investment organizations, with public sector bodies, with entrepreneurs, with peers, to really drive that full ecosystem shift? And I am going to stop there. Thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to speaking a little bit more to some of the Q&A in a moment.
Thank you very much, Anna and Kathy, for sharing that insights. I'm sure that the audience have gotten a lot of new inputs that they need to bring forward in their company and their cluster organizations. And the key point that kind of goes across both of you is that integration is key, and the chain is not stronger than the weakest link, and we need to work together. So I think kind of that sums it up, and we can move over to the Q&A. And as last time, we'll start the Q&A session with a Menti to you to get your input first before we get Kathy and Anna up on the screen. Or we see there's a lot of questions in the chat already, so we'll make sure we get through them as well. So if you could please find your mobile phone and tap into menti.com. And also, Kathy, maybe as we see this, people start answering their questions, maybe I can get you on the screen here as well to kind of comment. So what do you think is required to accelerate the transition to circular business models? And when you write in this in Menti, just write in what comes, like the first thing that pops in. This is just to get us started in the Q&A session. And
yeah, thanks, Katrina. I think it's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think, without maybe giving too much away, and Anna, maybe you have a perspective on this as well, but I think it's from the work that I'm currently doing with a number of our clients, I'm kind of seeing that there's sort of two things that are jumping out to me, you know. I think that the way in which circular has become a huge focus discussion point more broadly when we think about kind of the current geopolitical situation we find ourselves in, with, you know, rising environmental challenges and, you know, a ton of conflicting issues we're currently facing. Circular has never been more pertinent, and we're seeing that in legislation as well. What I think we're seeing is a lot of organizations setting really ambitious goals and beginning to really understand and think about how this is relevant to their business. We're also seeing a ton of pilots and cross ecosystem pilots, you know, multinationals working with new entrepreneurs, trialing new ways of working. But nobody has cracked it yet. And I think it's very much now where we're at this inflection point of trying to take it from pilot to scale. And that's the really tricky piece. But I think it has to be, you know, quick experiments and significant investment for the long term. And I think legislation will help. And we're seeing so much of that in Europe, you know, with the circular economy, new legislation that's come in as part of the Green Deal, and a number of different, you know, countries that are launching circular legislation, you know, even most recently Ireland, where I'm currently sat, has a new circular economy strategy. So I think it will be, you know, as regulation really starts to play a key role, and that will help accelerate the shift. But it's also this mandate internally, you know, a governance model and accountability to move from pilot to scale. And that's the really tricky bit, the nut to crack, that nobody has done it yet, but there's an opportunity maybe for a fast, you know, a first adopter to really come out and show us how to do that.
Yeah, and I think just reading the answers that popping on the screen, I think they've are aligned with what both you and Anna said, like culture and mindset change, moving from the old way of working, will and commitment, as you emphasize, Kathy, and openness to operations with others in the value change of mindset and values, as we touched upon, tax reduction on labor, and a big focus on companies from top management. And I think just having that in the back of our mind, moving over to the answers that you've written in the chat, and please just continue to ask the questions. We'll use 10 minutes now on that. And the first question I'll read from the chat is to you, Kathy. How can we measure the circularity of the business models? You touched upon it, but maybe like just elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katrine. And I think it's really it's a really good question, and it's one that is, as I mentioned, like really coming to the forefront of some of the work that we're doing when we think about circular intelligence. I think it is a piece of getting your own house in order still first. I think really being able to set, allocate and track circular targets is very, very important. Helpful if there is a standardized, you know, metric that is coming from an industry. So this is why cross-industry alliances that maybe set these targets would be critical. But in the moment, in the absence of that existing for certain industries and the majority of plays, really having a careful, considered approach to what actually it is you want to track, what actually will help you to get to your goals, and how you can really you know, work across those business units and tie your circular metrics to your business performance metrics as well. Because being able to tell the story of how this is directly relevant to the financial performance of a company is really compelling. And there is a storytelling element to this as well that shouldn't be underestimated. I think as well, being able to kind of audit and report against the metrics that you set, to talk about kind of building trust within your ecosystem is very important, and to showcase that you are not only kind of talking the talk, but you're walking the walk as well. But from an internal perspective, you know, these circular metrics are actually going to help to optimize and drive efficiencies in the organization as well, and to help make data-led decisions on what gets prioritized. So I think it's very important when we think about that as well. And also when we think about how, and as I mentioned, those tying into broader business decisions and informing actually the direction of parallel strategies, like when we think about, you know, and we touched on it earlier, you know, when you think about the people and mindset side of things, what's your hiring strategy? What are the skill sets and capabilities of your people that maybe you don't have at the moment? How can you look at the circular metrics that you've identified collaboratively with key accountable stakeholders? How can that inform some of those business decisions that sit alongside the financial performance of the company as well? So it's very much, I would say, a collaborative approach internally, and thinking about what makes most sense and what will enable you to carve a path forward, be data-led in the decisions that you prioritize, and to ultimately achieve some of those goals that you've perhaps publicly committed to.
You, Kathy.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another one, and maybe I'll give this to you, Anna, and of course both of you feel free to comment. One has asked, does circular business models work without advanced technology? And if not, how can we deal with the underdeveloped countries? So handing that question over to you, Anna.
Yeah, a very good question, and also thinking about how we can get scale. Obviously, it should not just be led by the developing world, but how can we really get this to scale also in the underdeveloped countries? I think the good thing with underdeveloped countries is that there is a much stronger incentives to do more with less. We see that these countries are typically really good at maximizing the life cycle and repeated use and pass on products to generations and generations. So I think that's the benefit with the underdeveloping world in the circular economy, because they simply have a stronger incentives to consume less and make more useful resource consumption. So that, I think that's first thing. And of course, technologies enable us to really drive efficiency. There's so many benefits of having connected devices and having the intelligence that can support, or even if you think about technology infrastructure for recycling. So of course, we see a disadvantage in companies or in countries where they're not able to invest or have that same infrastructure. There is a longer implementation curve in those. But so how can we help them? I think that's going to be my answer to this question. How can we help invest and enable them to develop these capabilities? Because as said, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So if we have operations in less developed countries, how can we invest and enable them to use technologies? And I think obviously here we're talking about advanced technologies, but we're seeing how also underdeveloped countries are investing in really innovative ways to better leverage resource efficiencies. I visited, for example, a lot of textile plants in China, where I can really see how they're thinking completely in using innovation and technologies to drive water efficiency, energy efficiency. So I'm hopeful. I've seen some really good examples, and we can help them help them.
Thank you, Anna. And Kathy, if you have anything to comment, please feel free, or else we'll move over to the next question as well.
Maybe just one comment, Katrina. I really think I fully agree with Anna, and would just like to build a little bit on that. Like, some of the work that we have seen through working with the Circulars Accelerator has been that where there is a broadband connection or an a mobile internet connection, some of the technology that is available through that is really outstanding. And when we think about some of the examples we've seen, like just to bring one to life, we've worked with an organization called BankU, who work with a lot of multinationals and who are very interested in bringing visibility to those workers at the very last mile who are maybe collecting bottles in, for example, Bogota in Colombia and bringing them back to recycling centres. These informal workers have never been able to access a bank account, but because they have a mobile phone, they're able to actually, send a text, and through BankU's blockchain solution, they're able to actually create a log on blockchain of these informal transactions, and these act as proof that these workers, and often women, can go to a financial institution and actually open a bank account, where they would never have been able to have had that kind of proof before. So often with the most basic mobile phone, some of these really interesting new solutions can be activated. So it's really inspiring, actually, seeing some of the work that's happening across the board as well.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the underdevelopment countries was one of the first to get like mobile pay, and so some in some places they're further as well. And moving over to a question that looks in towards to the company is how can we motivate employees to see the potential of circular economy so that they pick up the necessary skills? And Kathy, maybe I'll start with you, and then Anna, if you want to comment afterwards.
Thanks so much, Katrine. Yeah, I think this is very much from my side about the accountability, like who is owning the circular agenda. And we've seen this done in a multitude of different ways. For example, the Innocent Drinks Company has a really interesting way of doing this, where everybody creates some kind of a sustainability and circular spec to their job. So they actually have a priority that they have predetermined is something they're going to work on to advance the circular agenda of the organization. So it can be quite self-led if the instruction and kind of guidance comes from the broader strategic direction of the firm. But I think so there's kind of this moment of it has to maybe transcend across the organization, having circular champions at every level. But I think also the accountability must sit with people who are making the kind of key decisions for the business as well. So really having the circular agenda embedded at the CEO level, with the CFO, with the Chief Procurement Officer. So I think there's sort of those two halves of that coin, where it's very important for it to be driven forward, to have a central business mandate, but then that people feel empowered at every level to contribute and drive forward in a purpose capacity. But Anna, you might also have some thoughts on that. So maybe I'll hand to you in case you have anything to add, or more broadly indeed from other questions that I've answered.
I think my comments and thoughts are very in line with what you just shared, Kathy. I think that, as you said, we really need to enable our people and give them clear incentives and targets, because in some areas this will be more easy because the purpose is very strong of the business, I think, like a company like Innocent. But in other areas where perhaps if you think about in manufacturing with engineers who's always done things in the same way for years, now needed to completely rethink how they design or how they sell their products. So I think here you also need to strengthen their capabilities to do so, and really also set the right targets, because there will be conflicting targets. So here you really need to make it simple also for your people to make the right decision. And as you said, Kathy, having really strong guidance and mandate from your leadership will be key here. So I think that's one, I guess, knowledge and targets and sort of clear incentives and directions. But then I was also thinking about how you can help employees also understand the value that they contribute with. So not seeing circular as necessarily a non-profitable and cost activity, but actually truly visualize how it generates additional value for your business, and that this is not a greenwashing activity. It's truly competitive for your business to really drive long-term competitive and resilient business. So I think that needs to be embedded in the overall communication for this really to be taken serious.
Thank you very much, Anna. And also, Kathy, I think we'll round off the Q&A session there just to have time for a quick conclusion. Thank you so much for all the questions in the chat as well. It's great that you're so active. So we hope you enjoyed this session and that it's improved your knowledge of the circular business models and how companies can unlock new opportunities when embarking on this transformation journey. And if you go to the next slide, and if you want to take this a step further, Nordic Innovation, Citra and Accenture are for their third time hosting circular business models workshops for the Nordic manufacturing industry. The program will run this fall, starting with one online kickoff, followed by 3 physical workshops, where we'll use practical tools to build skills and collaboration across the value chain. So the program is free of charge and a valuable opportunity for you and your ecosystem of partners to accelerate the circular transformation. And with this, of course, just contact me. My details are there, or go to Nordic Innovation's website if you have any questions or are interested. And then I will end this fundamental sessions by thanking our collaboration partners, Nordic Innovation and Citra. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to you who have participated and been active during this session. Goodbye and have a nice day.